Well, to start, my name's Harvey Burgess. I joined SOE when it was first variant in, can I remember the month? I think it was June of 2000. And I came on as QA. I remember once I was hired, the first room we were in, there were 6 or 7 of us, all connected to one internet hub.
Yeah.
Oh, that was great times back then. But that was the tail end of Kunark, and I stayed with the company through, like Sean had shown already, through QA, and I did some design work, and then went into production, and I've kind of been doing that ever since now. So um, I don't know how much of this I should go into, or what questions you want to ask, Sean, or how you want to play this. So I'm just
Honestly,
kind of winging it.
yeah, it's always kind of winging it. I honestly, I just tend to start from the beginning, and we just sort of poke around and figure out what details we
Yeah,
can remember.
so I was playing a lot of EverQuest. I've been playing since beta, and while I was attending college at UCSD, it came up, and Valorant was looking for testers, and I was like, "Hey, I'm playing the game already. I love this game." So I went and interviewed back then, and found that this was something that I really liked, and I kind of stayed with it through. So I've been doing some aspect of video game development for the last 20 years now. So
Yeah, it's funny how fast it goes too.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
I was looking at your CV and it's just like in the roles as well, and it's interesting. Like the growth in your career is it's so awesome, and I'm always like, man, well that happened fast, and then I'm like, wait, but it's been 20 years, so it makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so you came in QA, and when you got into QA, were you thinking specifically like QA seems interesting, or is it more I just want a foot in the door, or was it?
No, it was definitely interesting. I'm definitely a type A, so like I like having everything in its place and making sure everything's working properly. So like QA for me was definitely a good fit for a long time. And while I was working in QA, I started being asked by a couple of the people, like Lawrence back in the day was a really good buddy of mine, and he was like, "Hey, like we're working on quests and we're looking for." Apprentices, like if this is something that might be your jam, you should probably write some stuff up. And so I did some apprentice work and some quest design in Velius, mainly some side quests in what was that zone? Kale,
Yeah,
um,
killed
with
was
a
it
bunch of
Draconic?
the giants, the frost giants there.
Yeah, yeah,
After that, I ended up continuing with that because I thought it was pretty cool and fun. And although I hadn't had very many D&D groups in the past, I'd played a bunch of um, muds basically, and being on that side of things was really exciting. So I ended up doing the same thing for EQOA, and mainly creating a bunch of items and some quest design as well for the first one, and then the second one I actually joined the team as a designer. So
yeah. Um, So Nick had just asked, do you remember any fun bugs or have any horror stories from the early EQ days as QA? These are
oh,
these are always interesting.
fun horror stories. I can definitely remember working on Velius, and we were doing some DX diags, testing out new shaders for that expansion. And at one point, we made all the characters black, like they were just pitch black,
Mm.
and couldn't figure out why. And that lasted for about a day and a half or two. So that was definitely interesting, not being able to test any of the armors or weapons because everything was pitch black. So
Right.
that was a good one. Man, back then it's pretty. I it's amazing thinking that this is like 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
Trying to think of these stories
So,
from back.
how big was the QA team? Do you remember? Like roughly?
The QA team for Kunark and I want to say about half of Velius was about 5 or 6 people. It definitely wasn't large scale as you see in some of these games nowadays. It's ridiculous thinking about the fact that we had this gigantic world that we were trying to test with 5 people.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I remember as well. Because when I got there, there were there was a phone tech crew, which I so phone tech support, QA, CS,
Yeah,
and in total with everybody, because it was like 4 or 5 phone tech support people. I didn't think there were very many QA people,
yeah,
and
yeah. We definitely didn't have many at all.
20 or 30 GMs at the most, and that was everything.
Yeah, we ran a tight, small crew, didn't we?
Yeah. And I remember coming back. That was actually so the size of QA was actually something that came up when I came back for Omens of War and looked at what the team was planning. And one of the hurdles was not whether or not the team can make it. It was we don't have enough QA people to test all of this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I remember working with you on Omens. Like there's periods of time back then where I'm like, I remember I worked on a ton of prototypes. I don't even remember if you remember. We actually worked on what was that? The Marvel pitch. It was I remember you, I remember Bill Coyle being a part of that group and that falling through and then it ending up being something that started running with DC at that point.
Yeah, that was my first exposure was I was trying to pitch random things, and then as other pitch teams were ramping up, I was sort of hopping in with some of that, and Marvel was one of them. Because it was weird. I think at this point we can even say I could have sworn that Marvel started as like Harry Potter, and then it
Yes.
was like that fell through, and then it became like Marvel, and then that fell through, and then that became DC Universe. And it was like
Yeah.
Ben and Matt and you and all those guys.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy back then. Um, just the prototypes and the things that we were trying back then. Thinking about them now, it's like, wow, we were definitely ambitious back then.
Yeah, well, it's weird too because looking at and this may tie into the question about like just sort of skipping quickly through the companies you've gone through and then coming back so that people have a better reference. But I'd be curious to see your thoughts as well because you've been deep in production for the bulk of your career now. Um,
Mhm.
we it on one hand it seems crazy that we tried some of the stuff that we did back then, but then also did some of the stuff. But I'm also wondering if part of the problem with the market today is that there's less of that and there's more if we're going to make it, it needs to be $100 million project minimum, and of course it's going to be a 500-person team, right? There's not
Mhm.
even thinking about could it be smaller. So could you run us through the stuff that you've worked on since then?
Since leaving SOE,
Yeah, even though I mean I know that was like 13 years that we don't want to skip through. We're going to come back to it, but then some of the other projects that help people right
yeah,
me.
yeah. After SOE, I went up to San Francisco and worked at Electronic Arts for a couple of years. Ended up working. You can probably see in the background. There's a poster for Dawn Gate. That actually got me moving up there because they were working on this MOBA, and I had just gotten into League of Legends, and I'd been playing Dota for a number of years, but I was super excited about it, and I was able to get in early with the dev team, and being able to. Uh-oh, did I freeze?
Not for me.
Okay, that's good because on my screen everything's frozen. So we'll see if that catches up. But I
Chat,
went up
let
there
us
because I
know.
wanted. Yeah, please let me know if you don't hear me or see me anymore moving. But yeah, I moved up there to work on Dawn Gate. I was super excited about it. Um, as we approached alpha and beta development, we had EA had a hard choice to make, and I won't say anything negatively to the decision to cease production on that game, but it's very expensive making MOBAs and getting into that market. Like
Yeah.
over the years, you can see how several have come and gone in that time frame as well. So. Um, the one thing I will take away from working on Dawn Gate, which was definitely flattering, is the fact that if anybody still plays like League, a lot of some of the changes they've made over the seasons, it seems like they found some things that we were doing that they appreciated and thought were good ideas, and they've incorporated into some of their seasons. So it's like imitation's the best form of flattery,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
that's one good thing that I can say I could take away from that. After that, did a couple side projects within EA as the team was broken up and started working on some other titles within internally. And then I actually decided to move back this way, and that's when I started working for Carbine.
Hmm.
Worked on WildStar, another MMO. That's something that I'd done for most of my career already, so it just kind of made sense to go back and work on that project. And that was fun for a couple of years. Um, After they shut down, I ended up going to Nexon, and Nexon was in Orange County trying to make their own new IPs, and so that was a great experience as well. But unfortunately, with them trying to sell and then not selling, there was a lot of turmoil and
Yeah.
confusion in what that was going to be, and then they decided to shut down that studio. So definitely something that anyone in the industry is far too familiar with, just the
Absolutely.
shuffling of people and closures of studios. So at this point in time, I'm back at Sony.
Hmm.
I'm working for Visual Arts, which is a PlayStation Studios um, studio. And we help with a lot of the artwork that you find in a lot of the internal titles for Sony.
Okay, and so that essentially it's is it like additional bandwidth to help them scale for different projects?
Yeah, so we basically do the gambit of art support. So we have our own motion capture stages. We'll do that from ideation to full production. We'll do the animation work. We do environment work. We do rigging. We do character work. We do outsourcing support. Like we do pretty much everything involved in game development on the art side, which is really interesting and really cool because I end up getting to work with a lot of different projects at different times in their development.
Oh, that's got to be nice. Keep it. The variety is nice at times.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
They don't stagnate. Years and years and years on one project can kind of. It's not bad. It just you kind of feel like you're missing out sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Especially when you're on longer scaled projects where you might have an idea of the development pipeline taking 2 to 3 years, and then you realize, oh, we're trying to chase the market now instead of being in front of it, and then you tack on another year or two on that, and now you're talking about 3 to 5 years of your life on one title that you're risking a lot on. So,
Yeah, I've done that once. That was DC.
yeah,
That
yeah,
was
absolutely.
yeah. It's
Just going into some of the stuff you were talking about earlier, though, yeah, I feel there's definitely with these larger companies, there's a lot of indication that they just want to stay making the AAA projects because it's less risk of adverse when you're making these large scale things that a lot of people are going to be swamping to, so
Mhm.
that you can at least be able to see what's going to come from that. It seems like a lot of these larger studios tend to shy away from smaller, quirkier things and leaving that to more of the indie developers, which is cool because then you end up with this segment where you understand where things are going to come from and you're able to communicate with a lot more of the development teams, rather than these giant corporations that are working towards these top tier kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's um I'm excited to see what some of the new studios wind up doing. This last 12 months has shown a lot of stuff emerging that I'll be curious to see where they land in terms of scale. They all have funding cuz like right now it seems like there's just so much money being thrown around out there. And so they have the funding. I'll be curious to see if they stay at like 50 to 100 person teams.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Um let's see, going back, so the 13 years that you were at SOE prepared you for, I mean, because your roles, you didn't necessarily mention titles or roles at the companies that you're at, but you've done, seems like after you left SOE, it was all production, director of production, and, that type of stuff. Be curious to just talk about like that path that you took from Variant to leaving SOE and kind of how you grew that skill set, and then maybe some of the details of those projects.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, working within QA, obviously, I was working on a lot of the EverQuest titles, also in QA, and I guess this is fun to mention. I also worked on, oh, what was that group? Basically, it was a platform group where we did a lot of the online, like shows like the dating show and Wheel of Fortune
Oh,
and
casual games.
uh, casual games. Yeah,
That was ahead of
yeah,
its time as well. It's funny, we killed casual games before it would have been it. Oh,
yeah, yeah. Casual games. Oh man, that was a fun time as well. But mainly besides casual games, I was involved with the EverQuest world, and so I worked on EverQuest in QA. I ended up working on EQOA in QA, and then as a designer, and then after that, I worked on EverQuest again as a designer, and then EverQuest 2. So I did a lot of time in the EverQuest universe, and the main reason why I was um, kind of looking for something else, and Dawngate was that experience for me, was the fact that I was kind of getting burnt out after 10 plus years working in fantasy. I kind of wanted to stretch my legs and see what else was out there and what kinds of things I could do. But I was definitely a designer on, man, I'd say 5 to 6 expansions for EverQuest, a couple for EverQuest 2, and then EQA, and then Frontiers, and then RIP, what could have been Underfoot.
the the so the EQ stuff that you worked on. Can you speak to that, or what do you remember
Say that
about
again?
the EverQuest stuff that you worked on, like EQ1? What of that
Yeah.
do you remember?
Oh man. What good stories do I have? So I can say I made the Monk 2.0 epic, 1.5 and 2.0. I also helped with one of the big stories I remember was working on uh, Shadows of Lucklin, and going through the zones and making sure everything was populated appropriately. I remember working with um, Jake or Oliver,
Mm.
and going through what was that zone called? Runes of a Akiva or Akisha. I don't remember exactly. Chad, do you remember the name of that zone? It was I think it ended up being a raid zone, but it was close to the yes, Akiva. Um, but I remember going through that zone and realizing, and I have no idea how we had missed some of that, but a large portion of the zone wasn't populated, and so we were going through and populating that zone. Parts of it, Jake and I, and that's one of the things that people had mentioned before, that it seemed like it was kind of haphazardly put together, and it
Mhm.
wasn't haphazardly. It just kind of missed a piece of the zone.
Yeah,
uh,
there were a few in that state at like
yeah,
at launch for Luckland, if I remember correctly.
yeah, definitely. Um, I think that was during the time where we were doing was that the time we started doing two a year, but those were definitely rough on the development team. We were definitely a well-oiled machine, but there there'd be things that popped up like that from time to time.
Yeah, so 2 a year, it really hit its stride. I would say once we were done with Legacy of Akesha, which was like 4 months,
Yeah,
then it got into more the 2 year cycle. And the part where we actually started to, I think, be a little bit more well oiled was you mentioned casual games. It's when Robert Pfister was the producer of casual games. They shut that down after Jeff and those guys left
yeah,
to start Sigil, and then he was made producer of EQ, and he was very much like a I don't play this game. I don't really care about the contents of it. This is you guys are nerds. Just I care about how we're structured and how we work and how we get things done. And so that was very helpful for us to get structure.
oh, absolutely. It gave us a lot more autonomy to actually develop a lot of the storylines, right?
Yeah, yeah. It was very much team driven from that point in terms of the creative. What he cared about was things like the schedule and us, you know, getting stuff to QA in a timely manner and having enough time to regress everything and stuff. So, where I learned all that shit.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so how long did you stay on? Because I bounced right before Gates, and then well, I didn't bounce. I got bounced off the team right before Gates, and then I got pulled back for Omens, and then I was like, I'm done. And so were you? So how much did you work on EQ, or was it EQOA by then?
Um, I was definitely doing EQOA and then came back for Omens. I didn't work on Gates, and then I worked on Omens, and then I want to say two more after that as well. Um, what were the names of those? Man,
Chad will definitely
going.
remember because we've had to do this a few times. I often just have the Wikipedia up so I can remember the
Yeah,
expansions.
I should definitely bring that up as well so I can remember.
The I'm curious. So while we're figuring that out, I'm curious about the EQOA experience. So we just had Michelle Butler on, and she spoke to it a little bit and was reminding me of the people that were on the team. Um, and I think the people that have talked about EQA so far have been Jeremy Ellis when he was on, Michelle. I'm trying to think somebody else had some time there. But I'd be curious to see if you have recollections of EQOA.
I remember. Oh man, I definitely remember EQOA. Some of it was terrifying as I ended up doing a lot of my apprentice work working on item naming. I definitely named over, I'd say over 10,000 items on that project.
How? How did you do it? Was it pieces of paper in a can?
Oh man, it was a variety of different ways. So at first, we started by naming them after regions that we were developing in the game, and then it was based on um, flora and fauna, and then um, it turned into like what lore elements we can bring into this to provide some of that, and then there were anything in every different way we could find to name a lot of those items.
What was
It
it?
was crazy, pretty
Did
crazy.
did the how were the tools and stuff? Like, how was it difficult to make 10,000 items?
No, I will say we took a more structured approach with EQOA, having both Tom Wells and
Mhm.
Lawrence Poe working on that project, who were definitely more systems oriented. They created a couple of I believe there were Excel worksheets that had locked cells, and we were able to basically play with points to create items that we wanted to, and some of the abilities cost extra points where you couldn't allocate those, and that's what we kind of used to make sure that we didn't have too many broken items. Kind of learning our lesson from the EQ days. So a lot of item creation was using that and those guidelines to make sure that we at least had the power ranges
Right.
in order for some of those.
And were you the sole item guy, or was that on top of doing zone design and quests and things?
Yeah, it was a little bit of everything there. And there were other people that I can recall doing that as well. Jacob, I don't remember Jacob's last name now, but Jacob was also, he had been brought onto the development team before I was. But we worked hand in hand on a lot of the item creation and zone quests and stuff like that.
Was it Thornley?
Yeah, Thornley.
Wow. Okay. I I don't know how that because a different Jacob popped to mind. And I was like, that was a friend of mine from high school. And then I pushed that away. And I was like, oh wait, no, Thornley. I have
Yeah,
so
yeah,
much trouble remembering stuff while I'm streaming. The second I hit play, my brain just gets foggy. So
yeah.
nice, I remembered. There you go, Jacob. But yeah, it was a really creative team. So as Michelle was coming through and reminding me everybody was on it, it was a creative team, and then you had powerhouses, like Tom, like Lawrence, who was very experienced on it. So it wound up seemed like for a small team, you guys had a lot of horsepower.
Yeah, I think something that we had in our favor was the fact that we all really liked each other. I would still say that was one of the best teams that I've ever worked on, and with. Just the fact that everyone was super dedicated and believed in what we were making and doing that was just that much more powerful for what we were trying to do at the end of the day.
I love that. You're like, we really liked each other. I was like, Ollie, Nick, Bunny, is everybody taking notes back there? All right. That's important. We gotta like each other.
Like each other.
I know I make it difficult at times. The so the the vibe there as described by Michelle matches that. And I spoke briefly with Dan Enright, not on stream, but just sort of casually last year as well. And
Uh-huh.
it's interesting too because it seemed like a lot of the personalities were really um well suited to the vibe of EQOA, in that EQOA also felt a little more playful.
Mhm.
And maybe that was just me just looking at the art and the fact it was on a console and stuff, but they had like a kind of a charming vibe to it too. which matched the personalities. Was that conscious, or was that just you guys are making a game and it seeped in?
I think that was definitely something that was surfaced and something that we definitely tried to approach. I mean, making an MMO of sorts on a PlayStation 2, like memory cards that had 16 megs of memory, right? Like this game should never have been able to be done, but it's amazing that we were able to. It's pretty exciting.
It's one of those
I also
games. I
remember like
underappreciated it. I wish I had played it more than we did. We played it, but I wish I had played it a lot more.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I remember trying like it's funny what you do for things you love. I remember going to the local mall outside of the office, and we were basically pimping network drives trying to get people to try out the game, right? So it was definitely interesting. I think one of the things we definitely tried to do was get in front of the release of Finals Fantasy, but since they already had that gigantic name recognition, I
Mhm.
think maybe if we'd come out second to that title, we might have been more successful as we were the first ones out there trying to get people to support a network connectivity, right, on your PlayStation. How crazy is that?
So that was one crazy thing. Then the other crazy thing, the reason why my hands did this a second ago was I was picturing the keyboard joystick that
Yes,
had
I still
the
have it. I wish I had it around me right now, but I keep a lot of that stuff stored so that I don't end up breaking it or losing it. So
it's yeah, it's worth keeping around for sure. So the social aspect of it, because the stickiness is, really rooted in the social part of it as well. And it was funny because that keyboard was such a monstrosity, but it made sense.
yeah, absolutely.
And then thumb really wasn't a thing yet. I remember the clip-on thumb pads for the console. What do the kids call them? The not the joystick. You know what I mean. Um, so yeah. Anyways, the thumb thing, and everybody was like, I remember this shit so well. There was because we'd have these discussions with like Smed and Russ and those guys. The They were like, people aren't going to be able to type fast enough with their thumbs because everybody had flip phones and no one was really SMSing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I went to a show that was nearby in like Mira Mesa or whatever. There was a place where young people after school could learn how to do music production and sales and recording and all this stuff, and they would put on concerts. And so I went and saw this really cool band from like LA or something that they put on the show there, and everybody in there was like half my age. But I noticed everybody had their little phones out and they're just typing away with their thumbs like so fast. And I was like, I went back to work. I was like, dude, the thumbs will eventually be a thing, right? Just, we got to
Muscle memory, right? Yeah, yeah.
go hard on the little thumb pad for the joystick. Yeah. So ahead of the curve. Um, so what were there challenges with design with regards to the inherent limitations of the platform, or was it once the art and stuff like that was worked out, you guys, it was kind of like working on EQ?
Once we understood the limitations of the platform, I think it made it easier for us to understand how to live within our means, right?
Mhm.
So some things we definitely tried to do, and testing internally did not work out well for us. But I think we ended up bricking one of our own internal PlayStations trying to do too much. But besides that, like understanding what we were able to do and what those limitations were, I think we were able to really polish what what that end product was going to be, and I think the game was so much better because of that. So,
How big was it? Do you remember, like, how big the world was, or
oh man, I know. In my opinion, it was too big, but I can't remember exactly. I think we had a grid. It was roughly like 12 by 16 or 12 by 20, something like that. Anybody in chat remember how large that world was? Man, I remember. So some of the commands we had allowed you to go to the individual zones we had, and they were all numbered by coordinates. So it was like 00 or 08 or 82 and all those. That would get you to any of the zones you were looking for. But right now, I don't, man, I couldn't even tell you what zones were by coordinates anymore. But that's something I had memorized because you going too fast, you'd have to go to these zones really fast to be able to do what you needed to go to the next one. And obviously, we had cheat sheets up to show you what coordinates matched up with what zone. But I mean, after a while, you just memorized what that was, and you were able to get to and from pretty fast.
so Ali just asked a question that was on my mind. I thought it was streaming because that tech was used again later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. But that didn't mean you couldn't go to the individual. So they were all matched up as far as zone lines, so they were seamless, but we still had coordinates in each of the
Mhm.
zones to be able to go to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And
Yeah.
then, um, was there when you did a go to, was there a delay in loading that chunk if you're jumping?
Uh, yes, there was a slight delay, and assets would load in as you moved around you.
Yeah. And then you guys, you're streaming off disk. Uh, that's yeah. So building the world and just understanding the streaming, I guess, because there's still that little bit of, unless I'm mistaken, there's that little bit of consideration of placement on disk.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Uh, Ali just asked, did each grid square run its own server?
No, we had them. Can I remember how that was set up? You know what? I couldn't tell you how that was set up anymore.
Uh, and if you could, it would be scary. I'll be honest with you. Like, why is my memory so bad? the
Sorry, I can't answer that question. Man.
then we
Yeah, yeah,
how
definitely.
how limited were you with the number of unique models and stuff? Was that I'm assuming that's a consideration at the time as well,
Yeah,
or
it's whatever we could fit on that disc, right? I
mm,
mean, and some of the information, like if we were planning on doing any kind of future work, had to be included on that disc as well.
that's right.
So during development, we're talking about plans 3, 6, 9, 12 months later. All of that stuff had to be incorporated on the disc already. So any events you saw while playing that happened, or any unique quests or things that we were doing afterwards with GMs or just through the storyline of the game. I mean, all of that had to be pre-planned.
I forget. Was there a disc based expansion, or am I thinking of a different game? Was, so was there an expansion where you could play your same characters?
Well,
Frontiers.
yeah, with
No, that was
Frontier, you were able to continue with your character if that's what you're asking.
yeah, yeah. And then that was
Frontiers
in the
had,
disc.
yeah, both the original and Frontiers on that disc.
So, wait, both the original and Frontiers were on the Frontiers disc, or Frontiers was already preloaded on the original disc?
No, the former.
Okay, cool. I was like, that was some nice planning. And
Yeah,
then the other thing
yeah,
too
right.
was
We had the entire game decided upon.
Oh, people think it works that way.
Yeah, yeah.
So then you also had the stress of when you burned Gold Master, you really burned Gold Master.
Oh yeah, back then that was game is done. There weren't any, hey, yeah, we can do a day one update like most titles kind of do now, where you're finalizing certain pieces after the fact, or you're still actually scanning through and adding those key elements, and then you add that all to the day one patch, where it's anywhere between a couple hundred megs to a couple hundred gigs at this point, with how large these games are getting now.
I was about to say, I swear I've had day one patches that were like mini gigs bigger than the game. It's just like,
Yeah, yeah.
welcome to your 20 gig game. Here's a 50 gig patch. So, um, so you guys, you wound up, you were on Free Roams as well, right?
Oh man, yeah. I was on Free Roams twice. So I was on Free Roams. Well, I don't know if Michelle went through how Free Roams came to be, but Free Realms originally started as a PC port of EQOA. It was basically supposed to be a PC version client of EQOA. And
And
then, oh, go ahead.
there, I remember there being a lot of buzz about replicating the streaming from
Yes. So,
EQOA, but just having it be
yeah.
PC based, which was smart because it worked.
So that's where the initial plan of using so for our own tools internally, we had, obviously we weren't all using PlayStation 2s, so we had a PC client that was emulating a lot of the elements of the game. So that was our starting point, and I was still on the team at this point. EQOA had definitely started winding down, and I think the only people that were still there were like uh, Alex von Minden. He was kind of spearheading everything, and I think Dan might have still been there, but they started coming up with new ideas for what this could look like, and I think the original name, and oh, I should have looked for it beforehand. So I do have like the marketing material for Fantastic Realms, which was the name of Free Realms before it was Free Realms. And they had a bunch of quirky storylines that they were imagining going through with this, and that's kind of the original story of where Free Roams came. And then there were a lot of different iterations. Um, as more people got involved and we saw how the actual market was changing, it was decided that free roams would be actually targeted towards more of a kids game than what Fantastic Realms was going to be. And the rest is kind of history now. You got what free roams ended up being. But I left during the where Fantastic Realms was actually becoming a game we were working on to work on a bunch of the prototype stuff that we were interested in doing. And at that point, I actually went back to the EQ1 and EQ2 franchises, and I ended up. That's when I was working on some of those other expansions that we were talking about earlier. What were those?
So two of them that were listed in chat earlier were Dragons of Norath, Dawn, and
I
Depths of
definitely
Dark
worked on
Hollow.
dragons. Um, and then there was a depth, depth,
Yeah,
depths, depths of Dark Hollow,
yep,
right?
that's the
Depths
one.
of so yeah. Then I worked over there, and then I ended up at that point turning into production as like going back to EverQuest and EverQuest 2 and seeing some of the things that we'd been doing for years and years. Like those guys I commend them. They are such a well-oiled machine. Most of them have been doing it so long, like they understand the ins and outs. Like they are definitely getting the most they can out of what they're doing there. And I saw the fact that like we hadn't actually started changing things at all because everything was working, and I thought I could help with bringing us kind of into the new age with some of the agile development that had been going on, and we were looking at transitioning to some of that software.
Mm,
So I was helping spearhead a lot of that transition within the EverQuest teams and throughout the actual studio, to be honest, there with a
yeah.
couple other um, producers. So that was a good experience there too.
Hey, we 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 have someone that's familiar with you from uh
Oh,
from the SOE camp. Or is it? I will always just call the company SOE. Sorry, TPG. And um, so the question I have with regards to that was when you were looking at the way that like the EQ teams were working, and then you look at kind of modern agile practices.
mhm.
How much overlap do you see? Because I reflect back on the way that we did a lot of our stuff, and I feel like there was a lot that was in the spirit of what's been formalized since then as like agile development.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, definitely. I'd say like back then, we didn't have very much collaboration between the artists and the designers.
mm,
Basically, designers were going through and on paper or graph sheets creating zones. Like I have a bunch of my zones that I've created still on graph paper, and you just kind of got together with the artists and figured out exactly what the kinds of proportions were going to be and where your POIs, points of interest, were
mhm.
going to be on the map, and potentially some storylines that were going to play out in the zone. And then they kind of went and did their thing for a couple of weeks, right? And then you kind of went back and forth with that process until you got something that seemed to work within the spirit of the ultimate design you were going for. Um, I think some of the things that we started doing later on were getting the artists and designers involved more with getting together, like figuring out what that overall plan was going to
Mm.
be together instead of doing it piecemealed where you'd be going kind of waterfall, like this person A works on this, and then person B works on this, and then person A, and then person C. So it was more collaborative going forward where the artists actually had more investment over what was going on in the zone, and maybe they were able to collaborate on different ideas or different storylines that you were able to bring to life in that zone that you were creating.
Yeah, and that was always a challenge back when I was on the team, even because it would be this sort of back and forth where folks might be, well, the artist didn't do this right. And it was like, when was the last time you went down and talked to the artist, right? Like, they're working on your zone. You should go down there. If not every day, you should regularly be sitting there and kind of looking at it. And um, I know there was a lot of like front loading of data design during that period. So I get that a lot of people wanted to just be heads down and stub everything into the database so they could just plug it in when when they got the art. But it was there were literally days where it's like, you know, hold my hand. We're gonna walk downstairs. You're gonna talk to the artist. Um,
Yeah, definitely.
so question in chat: what was your favorite aspect of EQ and EQ2?
Um, For EQ, I definitely have to say it was the epic quests, the epic lines of quests, because I feel even in my guild, like we had a bunch of things we were doing and we had fun, but it wasn't until the epic quest where you were really interacting with a large percentage of people kind of doing the same things, trying to figure out exactly what was going on and how that was going to shape up at the end of the experience. So I was super excited when I was able to actually work on the next um, parts of those, and internally it was funny when those actually went live. We were all sitting there and just terrified. It's like, all right, like we have bets on who's gets finished first and who's gets last. Because if yours got finished first, it meant yours was too easy, and if yours got last, it meant there was either a bug involved or it was too hard. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So we all had the autonomy to basically do what we felt was right with those quest lines. And personally, being a friend of Jeremy Ellis, jealous,
Yeah.
uh, and going with him through like the first epic 1.0. This is for the monk, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
for those that don't know. And that was my class, really, too. I can say this now because dummy David Ford actually put my characters. He was being very nice, and he put my character, my actual character I'd play as I think there's an AA ability named after my character now, so I had to shelve it. I'm like, cool, I can never play this monk again because now people know I either have a friend on the dev team or I'm a part of the dev team. So my character's name was Callanan Lee, and there's definitely a monk AA ability, or what were those called? I want to say disciplines, but
Yeah, discipline.
named after it. So he was doing that to be very nice, but it ended up costing me my character. So
What? So, how do you spell your name? I'm looking it up right now. Cal.
C that was Callanin. David Ford Fort.
Yeah. So, how's it going,
Uh,
Zarn? We're gonna have to get.
Galaxy's
Well,
Energy. Yes. Yes, that's the name of it. I appreciate him, but yeah, yeah. It was the
Callan's.
bummer because I definitely played with some friends. Like every couple of expansions, I'd definitely come back and see how things were and play through some of the content. Obviously, with the fact that I'm still in the industry and I'm playing and trying to do a bunch of things, it's very difficult to play one game for any uh, amount of time. But I'd always try to come back and see how things were going.
Yeah.
So good. But my actual new character I started playing, well, I used as a GM was Ratiz. And I
Mhm.
think that someone mentioned it in chat
Yeah.
earlier, but
So,
yeah.
Zarn here in chat is on the team. So
Well,
that's how he
cool.
is able to get that inside information up so quickly. Um,
Gotcha. I don't, that name seems familiar, but I don't recall who Zarn is. But
Zarn
yeah.
can dox himself if he wants.
Oh, hey, how's it going? Been a long time.
Yeah.
Hope hopefully you're doing well.
the the all right. So aside from that, the crap before we went down the EQ path based on the question, I was still thinking a little bit about free realms because you were talking about fantastic realms and free realms
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the inception there. You worked with Rich Waters on that, right? I mean, he was pretty well
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah, yeah, definitely worked with Rich and Laurelin as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that was a good experience. I think at that point what was I on the Free Roams team that second stint? Um, I ended up coming on and I was a producer. I worked with a bunch of people there just trying to work on the game, getting it out the door and everything. So that was a good experience working with Rich and Laurelin
Mhm.
to that.
Yeah,
Ex-
because the game itself, it's funny you mentioned Fantastic Realms. I didn't remember that at all, but
yeah.
it kind of makes sense because I remember during sort of the EQ era, especially when like Rich and Scott and I got pulled onto EQ2, there was that period where we were talking about new games, and I don't remember if you remember this being the inception of it. I swear there's some documents floating around somewhere that hit on this. That the sort of the original Free Realms came from ideas that we were discussing at the time of we we had this what if EQ was Legend of Zelda fetish going for a couple years, and then we were playing games like Jack and Daxter and some other console games, and it was like there's something about the horizontal progression of getting different utility that you would see in like the Nintendo games, and we were just like fixated on that, and it was there's discussion of what if there was a simple system in which you could swap hats or some consistent sort of item. It gave you a different set of abilities, but you had very limited abilities. And so the idea was collect hats and shit, you know, and then progression would be trying to gear up and maybe do some vertical progression, but really try to go horizontal and access all these areas.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so was that the sort of the beginning of Fantastic Realms, or was that
Yeah,
even used? Or
there was a lot of that, as far as, a type we were looking at. We also looked at RuneScape and a couple other titles, during that time that had that more horizontal
mm,
progression styles, which was definitely interesting because it's a different concept than most of the other titles that we had been working on up to that point, right? We had been known as a company that does grinding and vertical progression really well, right? I mean, we were definitely one of the first companies to really do like alternate style advancement as well. Um, and talent progression. So it was definitely a new concept that took a lot of time and effort to wrap our heads around. I do remember that.
yeah, and then the switch to be more kid friendly. When we saw that, I think a lot of us had been heads down when we start to see sort of free roams come together. It's a super cute concept. It quickly became one of those projects where you're kind of jealous you're not working on it.
Oh yeah, I loved the art style. Like it was so whimsical and fun, right? I mean, it was definitely different than the fantasy titles that we had been doing before, or like Planetside, where you've got these guns and stuff. It was definitely supposed to be a different experience, right? Like that Disneyland experience where everything around you is something that you should immediately understand and be able to interact and relate to at some point without needing to really go through the
Mm.
grind of understanding the ins and outs. So
Yeah, it, it's funny. Grind grind was something. There was always so much discussion of not having grind in games like during that period. I think that's lasted a bit, but definitely during that period, it became like marketing buzz, almost like no grind.
yeah, yeah, it was taboo to have anything like that.
What do you think about that though? Because you've got a deep career in production, and knowing the sort of logistical ramifications of the idea of not having grind. You got thoughts on that, or
Ooh, the only thing I'll say about that is I think content is key, right? So at some point you're going to have to find a balance of the amount of content you're providing and how long it takes to keep that progression going.
mm,
And I think it's definitely a balancing act and it's very hard to hit without really understanding who you're catering to and how far down the spectrum you're willing to go. So hopefully that kind of gives you my impressions on what that looks like to me.
yeah,
But it's definitely a moving target as well, as different games come out and they shape our impressions on what we like and what we feel or at least think we enjoyed about those games. It definitely influences our choices uh, in games and what we're doing in them going forward.
Yeah, and it's an interesting challenge, especially for PVE focused products. To
Mm,
me, it kind of feels like my crude way of looking at it is the grind's going to happen somewhere. So it's where are you going to create that loop? And
yeah.
if you try to defeat the grind by introducing fidelity, then you're introducing high fidelity grind, which may actually be more jarring. And so it's like we've had this discussion on the stream a lot about the difference between grinding a dungeon, the full dungeon over and over again,
Mm.
or grinding a certain raid over and over again versus going into a dungeon and sitting at a camp for X amount of time and grinding the individual spawns in a sense, right? And I think it's different personality types maybe like these things more or less, but I wish there was some way to get like a metric on how many people kind of feel that and how many people, especially in this day and age, because we're talking about old person shit. Like we're talking about boomer quest and stuff, right? Like how many of the generation Z and millennial audience that isn't part of this audience. You guys obviously know about camping. You're in the EverQuest, category. But like, how many people that maybe never played EverQuest have like actually sat there and camped a damn mob for like 14 to 203 hours?
Took me 18 hours for J boots.
Right. And it's an interesting thing because I almost wonder if for some people they might like it a little bit more. They're like, you know what? It's the same shit. I've got to sit here in front of a computer for 10 hours today, but at least I don't have to move around too much.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I just think about that a lot because when you went in and you were working on WildStar, right? That was more than of getting into like that's the WoW era of everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's a different kind of content, different fidelity, different. Did you see some lessons in that where you were like, okay, I've seen this before, or did you feel like it was a very new environment, or
Um, no, I mean a lot of these projects have the same goals at the end of the day, right? Like providing content and a memorable experience that people will bond over and grow with. And it's just the pieces that end up being different on how they choose for people to try to get to that point. And I'd say it's pretty standard across the board, but it's just those pieces that end up changing, and a lot of these titles have that positivity that goes in with it, and there might be like with WoW, I think their big thing was polishing all of the things that came before them, right? Just adding that extra finish to make it prettier than what it originally was. And a lot of these MMOs after that are kind of trying to figure out how they can put the polish on that WoW experience now and make it their own and make it something that people are interested in and at least trying again over brand new. So I think the teams that are going to be successful understand um, that line that they have to balance between the grind of continuing that vertical progress as well as the camaraderie they need to develop within the player's system going through that grind process. So the
Mhm.
more ways and hooks you have to establish people to grow that community, the easier time you're going to have of being something that has legs for people to want to continue doing.
yeah, and the it's it's interesting to see where or WoW made something that felt like a more uh, it felt like EQ with fewer barriers to entry, with less of sort of the as you mentioned, polished out some of the rough edges, made it more consumable for people that have never maybe played games in a genre or even computer games at all. Made it just a very accessible game, and
Hmm.
then it feels like um, in trying to polish even that experience, you're making something that's already fairly accessible even more accessible, which then maybe removes the community elements, like the rough edges that made community kind of necessary and fruitful. When you the stuff that you've worked on since then, have you kind of have you seen that? Is it by nature of the fact that it's a in air quotes better game that's learned? A lot of these are just inherently less social, but at the core of what we're making, it's social games.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, I attending E3 and GDCs and seeing what some of these companies are coming out with, you could tell like the trend. Instead of doing these gigantically massive products where there's tons of overhead and tons of um, service requirements, they're starting to transition to these smaller groups, right? You see the 3 to 5 player maps,
Mm,
and you go through those cycles, right? So the grind is still there, but you're doing it with a smaller group of people over multiple sessions at that point. I think it ebbs and flows. I think at this point, people are kind of getting tired of that as well, and they're looking at having more relationships in these games. I mean, I've met some of my best friends now playing EverQuest and some of these large scale games, and I don't do that so much with the smaller type projects. I have the same group of friends that I was playing EverQuest with now playing games like Borderlands and other games that we can play that are just faster paced now because of where we are in our lives. But I mean, that that need and that want is still out there for people, I think,
mm,
and we just need to figure out ways to give them what they want and make it something that we can actually continue to do, right? Because at the end of the day, everything costs money, and
yeah.
the more we can actually provide those services at a cheaper way, the easier it's going to be for us to continue those going forward.
Yeah, for sure. And uh, cheaper, at least in our minds, when we've discussed it here, has meant more flexibility in the success criteria.
Hmm.
If it didn't
Yeah,
cost you 100
absolutely. And
million,
it
and
could be, yeah, a bunch of different ways to do that, right? We just, yeah, you just need to cut costs some way. It's either through the art, through some of the tech, if you
mm,
have scaling, if you're able to, yeah, there's tons of different ways to make it less expensive, and that's really what I'm referring to there.
absolutely, yeah, and that's a huge topic on this stream. We I won't go a single guest appearance without doing a little bit of plugging. But since we started streaming, we um, the community here had a bunch of questions and ideas of like we were talking about because I started playing to play TLP, so I was just playing the classic era again on Eridu when it came up last year, and then since then was convinced to try P99 and have been playing P99 pretty regularly since. And then we've talked about what we like about that era of game, like that classic era, sort of when we were first playing, and then got excited about EQ, and then went out and joined the company. Um, and we've talked a lot about how to potentially put more of a focus on not reinventing the wheel, keeping art fidelity pretty low, and just sort of focusing on sense of place and everything that we can do with data, and then and the social elements, and really tapping back into some of stuff that was like really hard and shitty at times in EQ, but it made you seek out a group and it made you try to make friends and not ruin your reputation. Some of the stuff in chat right now that's coming up is talking about the toxicity in communities, the pace of gameplay impact on communities, and things like that. So we've been focusing on the question of whether or not that older school design actually dealt with some of these issues in a better way. I don't know if you got thoughts on it or if that's just an opportunity for me to ramble.
Um, I don't have any concise thoughts on that. I mean, I think the approach that you've mentioned is definitely what's going to be keep the dream possible. Yeah, I sorry, I don't have anything very deep
No,
to
man,
add.
it, it's a fine one. The question that came up earlier with regards to do you think there'll be another EQ? That gets asked every guest, even if guests aren't directly tapped into the company or haven't been for a while.
Yeah,
Um, so I don't know if you have an
obviously I'm
answer or
there with them. I don't know. But I think the EverQuest IP is something people still know, even though they haven't launched anything new besides expansions for the titles that they're currently working on. I feel enough people still know it that there's potential there.
yeah.
So yeah, I think eventually you'll find them either doing it internally or licensing it to someone else to do something with.
Yeah, they just got bought out the beginning of this year, I think. I think it was
I
this
thought
year.
so.
Time's flown. And it's interesting because with whatever it is now, 26, 27 expansions, they've got a world that's so. If you look at all of the EQ expansions, the lore that was done for EQ2, if you tapped into EQOA, you've got enough of like established lore that that part shouldn't take a lot of thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, so uh, the it's funny as chat's discussing sort of the toxicity and things like that. I I maybe have like the opposite of rose-colored glasses when I look back, and maybe they're still wrong. But when people are like talk about how much more toxic the online games are these days, I look back and I'm like, people were pretty shitty back then as well, huh? What am I missing? I worked in customer service. People are like, you know, people just say things that they wouldn't say back then
Yeah,
today. I'm
yeah,
like, I don't know, man. I've had to pull people out of zones and mute them as fast as humanly possible.
yeah. Definitely in our industry, it definitely becomes toxic. I do remember people on message boards basically telling me that I'm a shit human being because I missed a bug. Um, so yeah, that's definitely been the case for as long as I can remember. But
Oh,
I think there's just more people doing that now.
yeah, there's just
To
more of them.
yeah, yeah,
It's funny. One thing though is I rarely get on Twitter anymore, and so I'm like, I don't know. Everybody seems pretty cool to me. it's it's I don't really get on Reddit. So it's everyone's like, people are so horrible or people are so toxic. It's like, well, especially if you stand in the middle of a landfill. It's but I don't know. It's funny you mentioned that we had Ryan Barker on here as well a few
mhm,
times, and so it's always fun to remember the campaign to fire Raitan. Um,
yeah. So good.
there because people would be like, "You need to be fired. Your children need to be barred from ever getting in the industry."
Oh man.
It's just like, damn, dude, really? It was just one bug.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I still actually talk to him from time to time. We get together, especially now after the pandemic has kind of gotten to the tail end. I'm actually starting to meet up with people like that because obviously we worked together for years and we are actually friends now
Mhm.
and just being able to catch up on how things are going now and reliving some of those stories from past experiences as well.
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, you guys had a nice group of like people that kind of hung out, if I remember correctly, because it seemed like, and I don't know, I'm making assumptions. I was usually like Mr. No Friends. I would hang out with Rich or somebody at lunch, but outside of work, it's like I honestly I don't remember what the hell I did. Uh, but like you, I thought it was like you and Alan and Ryan and like a bunch of Jeremy and a bunch of really good people back then.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
do you feel like how much of having that kind of an the support network or whatever when you first got into the industry was a help, or was it, were you just so fixated on work? Because a lot of people ask about the industry and getting in.
Yeah. So, personally, I'd say that support system I had was crucial. Um, Jeremy Ellis was definitely one of the first people to really help me and improve my craft and give me more of the do's and don'ts. And I remember he made so much fun of me. I created this zone and I was trying to name it, and I don't remember what the name was, but I remember the actual initials ended up ending up like COC, and he's like, "No, no, that's not gonna work. Like, we need to change this." And I hadn't really thought that through, but like just those kinds of elements and how people are gonna react to something and what's that going to do, and just understanding like the entire process was something that was very helpful that he helped me through. So I do appreciate that, and I think getting into the industry now, there's tons of schools that specialize
So
in this and allow you access to create your own projects, so you understand at least a certain extent of what game development really looks like. And I'd recommend doing those if that's something that you feel you can do. But there's a ton of resources out there as well that you can do if you're a self starter to kind of do it as well. Like I create Unreal projects on the side, and I've worked in Unity as well. I know C sharp, so I mean I can get around and do things myself, even though that's not what I do on a day to day basis. But it keeps me abreast of the newest technologies and the newest things that are going on as far as the industry goes. And obviously, playing the games that are out there and understanding and starting to think about those a little deeper and understanding why they did the certain things they did and why they might have done them differently and all that good stuff helps you as well. So,
yeah, no, and I mean, it's super cool that you're still involved in that, because I know there is also, I've seen in production, like folks in production roles over time, it gets easy to be so focused on all the other stuff that's there that you can kind of get detached from the teams and from the kind of work that they're doing. I've definitely been guilty of that to different degrees over the years. You mentioned schools and things of that nature and being a self starter. When I look at your career from QA through being a producer, when you're leaving Sony, how much of that was just you being a self starter and going, "Hey, I'm interested in this," and sort of pushing?
oh yeah, absolutely. I'd say a large majority of it. I remember in Velius, I actually opened up 3D Max, and I was like, I'm not an artist, but I'm going to help Dan with some of these trade skills and creating icons and like stuff that mm, I never would have thought about doing before, and I kind of learned on the fly so that
Mhm.
I could help out in the ways that was necessary. And doing that build camaraderie between me and some of the other team members, understanding that I was willing to do some of the things that were necessary to get product out. And yeah, so I think all of that kind of stuff and getting to know the tools better that you're working with, and um, being comfortable enough in your own skin to ask questions to
Mm.
people goes a long way as well. I think a lot of us have done it forever, and I know with new people I end up working with, they're very nervous on asking the right or wrong questions, but just having a general understanding and understanding the way a person's mind works just adds to the relationship you have to make the best products you're trying to do as well. So,
Yeah, and it also it happens on the flip side, right?
but yeah.
As you get more experience, it gets sometimes hard to ask questions as well because you don't want to be like, I don't want these people to know I don't know what the hell this is. Did you run into that as you're sort of coming up through the ranks, or?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have some of that to this day, right? I mean,
Good.
I'm working currently at Sony again, but I mean, I work with all aspects of art production, and I am definitely not an artist. So there's a lot of things that I need to relearn, and there's a lot of questions I need to ask. I think the biggest thing I have with my team is the fact that I'm open and honest about it. I definitely know I don't know everything about everything, and what I do is try to keep the smart people around me and understand that they're actually the pros and treat them accordingly, and make sure that we all understand we're on the same side of whatever it is we're doing.
Yeah, as you said, I was like, good. Yeah, it's not just me. Yeah, I feel that. I've pretty much always felt that, coming up because there's always especially as these things got more complex or whatever. There's just always so much shit to learn or not. You just
Oh
can't
yeah,
keep up with it. Um,
yeah, absolutely.
did you feel like there was anything ever as you're coming up through the ranks? Was there? Did you hit anything where you're like, I'm hitting resistance, right? Like I don't. I want to move to the next level, or I want to move into this role, but I'm getting some sort of resistance, whether that was an external thing or you running into it yourself. I had like some examples of that early on when I was just trying to get onto the team. It was there were some gatekeepers that were like, if you want to meet with the dev team or become an apprentice, you've got to show me all your work and I will hand it to them, kind of shit, right? So some of it was kind
Yeah,
of overt. But
yeah,
then
definitely
yeah.
had some issues like that as well. I will say that I consider myself to be the first QA person while at SOE to actually become a designer and getting out of QA. So that was pretty cool. It definitely took some time and some extra communication because at that time, like QA was a career,
Mhm.
and at other software companies, that was something that you were hired to do, and you just kind of stayed and did that. But obviously, with games being so new, and the fact that we were growing and morphing into what the industry is now, like those opportunities for QA and CS members to actually train up and learn and grow and become development members was definitely something we were trying to do. And so, yeah, I think at that point, it became easier going because more people were trying to do the same thing and understood what that process was looking like. And then we grew into those programs, right, where you had the apprentice and guide programs, so people understood exactly what that process looked like going forward.
Yeah, it's funny you point that out because I didn't even consider that, but it was mostly us CS folks that then went in and became apprentices, not QA. And then at the time, the logic that I was always told, because I had started asking questions about production while I was still like in San Diego, because it seemed like the only way to get a new game made was to have a producer that blessed it. So whether it be like Ben Bell, for some of the stuff that was going up during that day, or there were a couple of other producers that seemed to be, if you wanted something made, you had to basically get their buy-in. And the
Mhm.
logic at the time that I was told was, uh, programmers make the best producers because they know all the details of how hard it is to make a game. And then over the years, I've found that not many I haven't worked with many programmer producers, whereas I've found people that then came in with very different production sort of foundation or backgrounds wound up going in that role or former designers. Did you see any of that kind of stuff as you were working your way into production, or?
Uh, I definitely would say it was there. I think in my own case, the fact that I was definitely a type A personality and the fact that I liked analyzing things and coming up with new processes definitely helped my case and getting into production. And
Mm,
then at that point, it was on myself to actually do the reading and understanding the processes and the pipelines involved and creating some of those myself and creating workflows so I'd understand exactly what I was trying to get across on these projects.
mm.
So, yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, I'm curious, chat, because I'm looking at the time and we're gonna be coming up on your
Yeah,
2 hour mark
we
soon.
got maybe a couple more minutes here.
Yeah. Chad, did we miss anything? Do you have any specific questions that Harvey may be able to hit? Usually, as we're going, people are pretty good about when we're on a topic throwing it up there. So we thank you for EQOA. Not a question,
Yes,
but a
you're
good
welcome.
statement.
I was definitely proud of that game.
People still come in. There's a lot of love that's come in here over the last year on the streams for EQA. Anything in EQA that y'all wanted to add but couldn't for some reason?
Oh, there's a ton of things we wanted to add that we couldn't. It was all based on the memory card and disk space, right? So, I mean, um, we definitely wanted more quests. I will say, like EQA Underfoot, we had maybe half done by the time that that project got canceled, unfortunately. And we were actually upping the art quality for it, and as we as we were able to do more, we were actually increasing a lot of the quality across the board there. So yeah, a lot of things like that. We wanted to do that. We just weren't able to.
Yeah. At some point, so I've had Jeremy on last year, and it was back when I was still trying to figure out like my connectivity. It was like one of the first early streams. At some point, we might have to see who we can find to do an EQOA like panel. That way, you can sort of nudge each other's memories and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're down for that,
Do that.
sometime this year, I can poke around and see who'd be interested, and then see if someone like Dan Enright or somebody that hasn't been on yet might be interested as well.
Yeah, it'd be good to do.
Cool. I'd be happy to try to pull that together. Um, yeah, man. So as we're coming up on the end of your time, just want to say like I really appreciate you hopping on, and getting Discord set up and everything to be with us. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
it's fantastic catching up. And
yeah. Been a while for sure.
I'll tell you what, if people have questions, and you know, a lot of times after somebody is on, people will have some more questions. I'll If you don't mind, I'll pull someone together. If it's just a question here or there, maybe I'll just shoot it to you. Or if you think of anything,
That worked
or
for me.
then we'd love to have you back on, and I'll definitely look into getting that panel set up at some point.
Yeah, sounds great to me. Well, it
Cool.
was a pleasure talking to you and everyone in chat.
Number one Harvey
Number one
memory: the
Harvey
sound you make
memory,
during
the
magic
sound
gather
you
a
make
bird's
during
back.
magic. We used to play a lot of Magic on the EQ team after hours, and I was definitely a character. I did a lot of voices.
Do you remember the bird sound?
Oh, man.
Mhm.
It was foolish. I don't remember exactly how I did it, but it was like, "Caw-caw, caw-caw," when any of my birds were attacking. It was good times. So good. I remember
Perfect.
that and let me ask you a question when I hit someone with an lava axe spell. It's good times.
Alright, maybe we'll have to have you on to play Magic: The Gathering as well, so
Sounds good.
dude, thank you so much, and
Awesome.
we'll we'll close out here, and then I'll shoot you a message when we're done, and I'll cut the VOD right around here, man.
Alright, sounds good.
Alright,
Pleasure being here again.
thank you so much.